Okay, so we're looking at both imagery and symbol, and when you do that, many of you will want to rush into uh, the grand prize, symbolism. What does this concrete object represent? But you'll find that often it's a bit easier first to focus on the imagery. First of all, the analytical methods connected to imagery are much simpler than those connected to symbol. Secondly, the author usually uses imagery to just accomplish a very simple, discrete task, unlike symbol, which is a huge task. So if you're rushing to symbolism, that's fantastic, but realize that's a bigger job than imagery. So did anybody here have a discussion just of some imagery that they noted that they felt was pretty important? A passage of description maybe that you'd like to focus on, something that resonated with them? Or was everybody rushing to symbolism? Amber, what you got?
Well, in the beginning, when you started the phone call, it got you back to that.
Let's take a look at that. What page are you on? Phone call from the hospital. Good. Okay, here's how we go, folks. Amber or somebody else brings up an example. We all page through to what she's talking about. Amber, would you like to read the selection or the passage that you feel is important?
My connection is full of static sounds and affects the receiver hard against my ear. Hello? Pardon me, who is it? It's Dr. Burst from the hospital in Grant, and his voice in my ear has the quality of an old recording. I can't believe what he is saying.
Excellent. Let's pause there for a moment. Thank you, Amber. Amber, I'll continue to question you a little bit. What of this imagery do you find to be important? Or let me rephrase the question. What connotation are you finding? What sort of emotional associations, what kind of figurative meaning are you getting out of this? Amber, pause for a moment. As I work with Amber, realizing that I'm modeling a method that all of you should practice. If you're struggling for it, let's start very basic. Is this a positive or negative image? Very good. Why? Why is it a negative image? Do we like phone calls of low quality, or do we like phone calls of crystal clear quality? That's right. We never get a phone call where it sounds like somebody's in a tunnel during a tornado and say, wow, this is awesome. I'm glad I can hear every fourth word that you're saying. That's it. No, don't hang up. Let's not try this again. I like the quality right now as it is. No, nobody says that. So if we say full of static sounds, what emotions would you say that this resonates? I've been asking Amber enough. So give me some emotions. Tension. I want at least two more. Anxiety. And Ian, what you got? Annoyance. Very good. So as I ask Amber, hey, what's the connotation? What's the association? You start with basic emotions, negative, positive, and then you fine-tune that a little bit, talking about some big words that could properly express this. Don't say it makes me feel bad. You guys laugh. You wouldn't do that, but many students would. It makes me feel anxious. It makes me feel tense. It makes me feel annoyed. It makes me feel frustrated. It makes me feel powerless. And it does. Amber, what were you going to say? Yes. Confusion would work as well, because you cannot hear what they are saying. Excellent. Full of static sounds, press the receiver, hard against my ears. Da, 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 da. Good stuff. Jessica, what question had you asked me about? Share that question with the class.
Oh, yeah.
Say it louder because, yeah, not everybody can hear.
We asked, like, silence.
Does silence count as a symbol? And my response was what? Come on, what's the big word that I... Motif, excellent, from our vocab unit. And the motif is probably carried by what? You were about to say it. Huh? Correct. I'm sorry, I'm just drawing it out. I know you know what you're talking about, and you and I are communicating. I want everybody to benefit from that communication. So it's possible that there's a motif of silence that's carried through the imagery. Jessica, here's your example. Right? A motif of a lack of communication, of some kind of breakdown in communication, which could be silence or it could be the static filling the phone call. So you were asking me about the motif of silence. And I'm telling you right now that Kogawa carries that through her imagery. And Amber's just given you one example. Michael, you have a question? Yes. Yes, that's added imagery. I press the receiver hard against my ear. She writes that intentionally to carry through the frustration and the powerlessness, that sort of feeling. Did somebody have more imagery? Maybe Jessica and Emmy, were you looking at the silence issue? Doing water instead? Does anybody else have imagery of silence? Imagery or description of silence being carried through? And if you weren't talking with your partner about that, maybe you remember something you could pass through. Haley.
The spider, and then you're talking about how the spider, and then like later, 165 is talking about like the moth, and then this the little like Mayu piece, I don't know the name. She told, I don't know,
Kenji?
She told Kenji not to kill the moth. So we were kind of thinking maybe it was like, maybe if some people wanted to stand up, like justice is.
Excellent point, Haley. And I think what you have there on page 165 to 166, and it's not the moth she's asking him not to kill. She's asking him not to kill the red insect.
Oh.
But you've got an extremely potent image, and you're right, it's totally connected to the spider. So we need to focus on this symbol of insects and how they're behaving. And I think you've got an excellent explanation of that. I'm going to pause you for it, though. You're going to be the next one. I want to see if we can find another image of silence. And then as soon as we've got that, we're going to go to yours. Okay? Johnny, do you have something?
Yeah, so we discussed, like, in chapter 11, how she was, like, molested by that man.
Old Man Gowers.
Yeah, and how she didn't tell her mother about it, and I guess that would be, like, silence.
Excellent. Can you find any sort of page reference that might describe her being silent?
It's like the last page of chapter 11.
I believe you're correct. Final page of chapter 11. Let's just try to find that. 77.
Yeah. I mean, like, at the top you go, don't tell your mother because she doesn't come here, and then down she's talking about playing her mother's leg, and how, like, there's a secret, and she's not telling her mother about it.
Oh, okay, the payoff is right there at the bottom of the page. Look at that paragraph. Read it loudly there, Sophie. That last paragraph, read that loudly.
In my childhood dreams, the mountain yawns apart as its presence spreads. My mother is on one side of the red, I am on the other. We cannot reach each other. My legs are deep on.
Excellent. It's a crazy kind of metaphorical image, right, of her separation from her mother. Let's talk about that for a moment. I'm not going to write on the board, but everybody should be paying attention to that paragraph at the bottom of 77. Mountain yawns apart, chasm spreads, my legs are being sawn in half. Crazy dreamlike imagery. Sophie, positive or negative? Negative. And can you give me, you start the ball rolling. Give me an emotional word or a word of emotion that describes the feeling of that passage. Okay, separation is a noun. What do you feel when you're being separated from something that makes you comfortable? Depressed? Add. Abandoned. More. Lonely. Worried. Okay, let's look at Hongqui's there at the end. In the last bit, somebody says, my legs are being sawed in half. Reaction? My legs are being sawed in half. Your reaction to that sort of prospect? Ow. I think we need to go a little bit stronger than something like lonely. And I think worried works, but I think we should carry over Samantha's idea of anxiety. Anxiety is a mix of worry and fear. And severe anxiety could mix some terror into it as well. The anxiety, the fear over what is happening, the fear because of this loss, this breakdown in communication, a separation from somebody else. So now we're generating and we're building some abstract ideas, some figurative meaning. And how are we building it? By two seemingly disconnected images at different parts of the book. One is static on the phone. The other is the image of being separated from her mother because of the secret that she must keep regarding Old Man Gowers. What you should be seeing is a pattern, and that pattern should be subtle. That pattern should not be coming out right on the surface where she says, hey, silence is a big problem, and silence makes people feel upset. No, she's expressing it rather poetically. If this is the case, if Kogawa is actually demonstrating some sort of motif or meaning regarding silence and how it affects us personally as human beings, then you should be able to find more examples than simply this. So I'll get your question in just a moment, Emmy. Oh, okay. You have another example? Okay, sweet. Hold on just one moment. This is the payoff. The payoff is for you to sit down in a 40-minute class period and write an essay about it. Hint, hint. The payoff is for you to receive a prompt that says, explain how Kogawa uses imagery throughout the novel to depict, or I'm sorry, to develop a specific figurative meaning. And if you say she uses her imagery to explore the effects of silence on human beings, you have 1, 2, 3 examples. What's your example? 170. Okay, 170. Do you have a passage you'd like to read?
So down at the bottom of the page, it says, what's your name, dear? A therapist has been down at the village.
Good. Yes, and over the next page or so, she continues to refuse to speak as Roughlock is speaking to her. And yeah, you could take, I'm glancing through 170 and 171, a description of her silence. Hannah.
I feel like all of these mean something bad. Could it mean something good for silence? So I think I found them where it does mean something bad.
Oh, excellent. Well, let's think about it for a moment. Hannah, what's the overall focus of the novel? What's the novel really exploring? Just simply, if you were to summarize it to somebody who said Obasan is about, what's the basic story about? That's okay. That's a fair enough comeback, Hannah. Somebody see what I'm looking for. What's the novel basically exploring? Japanese internment in Canada during World War II, right? But it's a little bit more than that because the novel doesn't take place in World War II, primarily. The novel takes place primarily in later 70s, in the 70s. God, sorry, later. Hannah, the novel is about whether or not they should explore that crime in the past or if they should just leave it in the past. Will leaving it in the past help? Could you see, hold on a second. We have a crime against a people in a nation. Could it be beneficial just to forget about it and leave it in the past? Is there any way that could be of a benefit? I think there are ways that that could be a benefit. Are there ways that that could hurt? Yes. So Hannah, the answer to your question is yes. Could this silence be beneficial? Sure. Because I could see, have you ever heard of course you've heard the phrase, let bygones be bygones? Just like forgive and forget. Those sorts of cliches come into our consciousness because we think sometimes just forgetting about a crime is the best way to get past that crime. What's your example of silence being positive?
She looks to her mother with like comfort at the time. I think it's on page 71.
71?
And several times she talks about how her mom does not use words and that she doesn't speak when she does something wrong. I think she she did something with the chicks. She put them in a pen where they weren't supposed to go.
Oh, good.
The silence is good for her.
Okay, good. Let's see. We're on page 71.
Yeah. And on 70 it says without a word. It says without words. The next paragraph.
I'm going to pull something from there, Hannah. I think you might be onto something pretty interesting. We're thinking about not necessarily mother immediately, but Mrs. Sugimoto. Mrs. Sugimoto reminds me of the white hen, always fussing over her boys, telling them to put sweaters on, and even when the weather is warm. Her face is not matter-of-fact like mother's. Her eyes search my face. Her glance is too long. She notes my fear, invades my knowing. How does Naomi feel about Sugimoto? Positive or negative? Negative, right? She feels negative because this woman is constantly questing for her to talk, questing for information. So, Hannah, you're correct that she is comforted by her mother's silence. Her mother's refusal to press her mother's refusal to focus on this is very comforting to Naomi. Yes, you have found an example where silence could be a comfort too. And unfortunately, Hannah, you've thrown a wrinkle into our thesis. No, you shouldn't be apologetic. I'm joking with you. Any novel that's worth its weight would include that complexity. Why? Because human nature is not simple. Our experience is not simple. And if you want to look at pop entertainment that makes pretty simple conclusions, they have a limited purpose. Something like the Harry Potter series becomes very interesting when it becomes contradictory, complex, and unclear. When you're not quite sure whether somebody is good or bad, and when you ultimately realize at the end that they're both. When they're very clearly drawn characters, you know this person's bad, you know this person's good. It's uninteresting because that's not life. So, Hannah, you found something that throws a wrinkle of complexity into it, but that's good. It shows that Kogawa is a good author and that this is an interesting book, but it takes some brain power to work it. MJ? Yes?
Would we say, like, Kogawa uses the imagery of silence?
That would, okay. MJ, if you're asking about, and good, I'm glad you're thinking in these terms. So, literary analysis claim, in Obasan, Joy Kogawa uses imagery to develop a motif of silence. Let's say that. So your question is, should I specify imagery? Not if you're talking about the whole novel. Because what will you do? You will unnecessarily restrict yourself. So if you say imagery of silence to depict a motif of silence, that doesn't really, that's redundant. If you just say imagery, I think that would help because then you are open to more examples of imagery. But you're still specific enough that you're saying we're talking about imagery today. Okay? Any last questions on this? Wow, good discussion. I hope it was as clear to you as it was to me. And of course, now we have about 2 minutes left in the class. So very quickly, Haley, I'd like to address your point. What page were you on with the red insect?
65.
You're on 165 and 166 with the red insect. If you do not recall the red insect discussion, then you may want to take a look at that. Oh, by the way, when we do this, if you have the imagery symbol journal out, you should be noting this if it's not already noted there. So if you did not note the red insect on 165, sorry. That's correct, right, Hannah? Or Haley, sorry. 165 to 166, you should note it. Remember, that final test, that in-class essay, will be open note, open book, but only your own. So if you have those referred to, you're good to go. What's the spider reference? What page was that on? Do you recall? 29? Thank you. Haley, really quickly in the waning minutes of class. Oh, I'm sorry, Emily, did you want to clarify something? Butterflies, yeah, because they find the butterflies in the backyard behind that bunkhouse, right? So we're talking about, do you remember the page on that, Emily? 134? Okay, can't summarize it. Look for insects. We've got 3 examples. We can continue to discuss what they mean later on.